For 16 years, they made her feel like she didn't belong in her own home. They never knew the girl they treated like a servant was hiding a truth that would change everything. When Sophie Miller was 6 years old, she was adopted by the wealthy Harrison family in London. Her new parents, Richard and Victoria, promised to love her like their own daughter. At first, they did. But everything changed when they had a biological daughter, Amelia, 3 years later. Amelia became the center of their world. Sophie slowly became invisible. Amelia received expensive clothes, private tutors, and holidays abroad. Sophie received hand-me-downs and endless chores. Whenever guests visited, Victoria proudly introduced Amelia. "This is our daughter." Sophie would stand quietly nearby. Nobody noticed when Victoria stopped introducing her at all. By the time Sophie was 16, she was doing most of the housework. She cooked breakfast, cleaned rooms, looked after Amelia. Yet whenever something went wrong, Sophie was blamed. One evening, Amelia accidentally broke an expensive vase. Victoria immediately turned to Sophie. "What did you do?" "I didn't touch it," Sophie said. Amelia looked at her mother innocently. Sophie was cleaning near it. Victoria believed Amelia without question. Sophie went upstairs without arguing. She had learned that defending herself only made things worse. But Sophie had one person who always believed her. Her school mentor, Mrs. Bennet. She noticed how intelligent Sophie was and encouraged her to apply for scholarships. Sophie began studying secretly at night. She became one of the highest-performing students in her school. When university applications opened, she applied for a prestigious scholarship without telling her family. A few months later, she received the news. She had been accepted. Her tuition would be fully covered. For the first time, Sophie felt free. Then something unexpected happened. While packing her old belongings, she found a small envelope hidden inside a box that had belonged to her adoptive parents. Inside was an old letter. The letter was from a solicitor. It mentioned Sophie's biological parents. But one sentence caught her attention. "The trust established in her name will become accessible when Sophie turns 18. Sophie was shocked. She had never heard about a trust. She took the letter to Mrs. Bennet. Together, they contacted the solicitor named on the document. The truth was unbelievable. Sophie's biological parents had been successful entrepreneurs who had died in an accident when she was a child. Before their deaths, they had created a substantial trust for their daughter. The money had been protected until her 18th birthday. The solicitor also revealed something else. Richard and Victoria had known about the trust from the beginning. Sophie suddenly understood everything. They hadn't adopted her simply because they wanted a daughter. They had been appointed as her guardians because they wanted control over her inheritance. But they had never expected Sophie to discover the truth. When Sophie turned 18, the trust legally became hers. She moved out immediately. She stopped answering Victoria's calls. Then the solicitor informed the Harrisons that their legal control over Sophie's finances had ended. Victoria was furious. "You can't just abandon your family." Sophie calmly replied, "You stopped being my family a long time ago." She used part of her inheritance to fund her education and invested the rest wisely. Years later, Sophie became a successful businesswoman. She also created a foundation that helped children who grew up in difficult foster and adoption situations. Meanwhile, Amelia struggled financially after making several poor investments. Richard's business also began failing. One afternoon, Victoria contacted Sophie. "We're in trouble," she said. "We need your help." Sophie listened quietly. She remembered every birthday she had spent working while Amelia received gifts. Every time she had been blamed for something she didn't do. Every night she had wondered why she wasn't loved like a daughter. Then she said something Victoria never expected. "I won't give you money." There was silence. "But I can give you something better." Victoria waited. "An opportunity to become the kind of people you should have been 16 years ago." Sophie offered them nothing for free. She gave them information about legitimate work and financial counseling, but they would have to rebuild their lives themselves. She didn't want them destroyed. She simply refused to let them use her again. Years later, Sophie visited her childhood home one last time. She stood outside the door and realized something. They had spent 16 years trying to make her feel like she didn't belong. But they had failed. Because Sophie had finally discovered something more important than their acceptance. She had discovered her own worth. Do you think Sophie made the right decision? Tell us in the comments.